Портативный телевизор «Юность 402» с успехом может стать вторым телевизором в доме.
Он любит Москву, он любит Москву, он любит Москву, он любит Москву.
Hi, and welcome to Tsar-Подкаст. It's our podcast about how you can visit Russia. Today we're going to take a look at some Soviet design.
4 years ago at the Moscow Manege, they showed us how things looked back in the Soviet Union in the 1950s through the 1980s. You know, for various reasons, including churning out lots of Russian children, Tsar-Podcast was not able to bring this exhibition to you in time. But we've taken advantage of our New Year's pause, and we'll have some time to study design in the USSR. So please, take a look around at all the objects of this exhibition, and I will briefly tell you about the history of Soviet design. The strongest period of socialist Soviet design occurred very directly after the October Revolution. It first arose from the intersection of big design projects for mass agitation, or as they say in Russian, agitprop. And after the 1920s, Russia began to develop professional designers carrying on the revolutionary spirit. Russia at the time had become one of the most important centers of the formation of design. However, around the mid to especially late 1930s, there was not as much time for design, as the country was very concerned that there could be an upcoming war, and there was a need to catch up with the West. But beginning in the 1950s, the Soviet Union once again had the food, time, and resources to awaken their interest in design. In 1961, the All-Union Scientific Research Institute of Technical Aesthetics, that's a mouthful, began to publish their magazine Industrial Art, which put Soviet design amongst the top places of European aesthetic of the period. It was a time of artistic revival in design. Much attention was paid to the development of new design concepts organically meeting modern demands. In the 1960s, standards began being revised. Careful attention was starting to be paid to the functionality and aesthetic quality of consumer goods. It was at that time that design was most in demand for the entire period of the Soviet Union. This also included expanding to the field of advertising. Periodicals and publications also greatly changed. There were new styles and artistic expressions popping up. In the 1970s, there began to be a very critical reaction to the first and second waves of avant-garde in the Soviet Union, which happened during the 1920s and 50s. The design of the 1970s became much more routine and yet, to a degree, very anonymous. The 1980s were a time of more open interest, looking to other countries for inspiration. But with the 1990s, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, and its design strengths ceased to exist with it. However, these formed the basis of modern Russian design as we know it today. The Soviet Design exhibition shows us objects of everyday life in the Soviet Union from the 1950s and beyond. At that time, various industries were still using pre-war stamps, shapes, patterns, and so on. There wasn't much original work. The first post-war graduates of the Stroganov School came into the factories and design shops at the turn of the 1950s and 60s. At that time, designers had the task of modernizing their techniques. Some of the main themes in the design work of the 1960s through the 80s was regarding machines, means of transport, and objects not for your personal life. In other words, big stuff. Naturally, at the time, the designers were thinking about functionality first, as well as utility, and then the appearance of the products kind of took a back seat. Much Soviet design of the time shared a lot in common with its, let's say, capitalist brothers abroad, and there came to be a bit of a negative attitude towards such designs. And indeed, many people liked to refer to it as Soviet design, so that the way there would be no hint of the West. Beginning in 1962, all enterprises in the country were required to have a registered trademark. At the time, artists had to come up with a whole myriad of different logos and symbols to demonstrate the high quality of international projects and products created in the enterprises of the USSR. The Soviet Union then became a very powerful system which was rapidly interconnecting design organizations which had no equal in any other country. And this movement laid the foundations of modern design and had a significant impact on the world of design culture. And now we have the opportunity with our fresh eyes to look back at Soviet industrial and graphic design and appreciate it. Not as some cute little retro silly stuff and posters with Lenin, but as a fascinating systemic approach to design engineering. Soviet design covered all areas of human life in the USSR, from childhood and games to sports to mass events, leisure and hobbies, even family life and education. Basically, it was everything. But the main thing was that it was everywhere. And it was a part of absolutely everyone's lives until 1991.
And that was our podcast about Soviet design. We hope you found it interesting. And while you're checking out the relics of Soviet design left in Russia, remember one thing: respect Russia. I'm Tim Kirby. Take care.